I remember working in 1999, I was brought in by McKinsey to help them win the war for talent. And the war for talent was a phrase that they coined, and it came out of the birth of the dot-com enthusiasm, where a lot of these professional services companies found it very hard to attract and keep the most talented people. And I remember going to visit one of the partners from the Deep South, and I said to him, what do you think McKinsey needs to do to win the war for talent? Traditional consulting fashion, ask your client what they think the answer is. And pat him on the back, big southern gent, and he said, Octavius, he said, the war for talent is over. The employee won. And I really like that as a thought about where we're moving in this journey of the war for talent and where we're moving in the area of employee engagement. Now, we have looked at a lot of research which we want to share with you today, and the first piece is around the business impact. And the business impact is almost got to the stage of undeniable. It is really hard to find data that suggests anything other than a correlation between employee engagement and business performance. I'll give you some stats up here. There are plenty more like them. Most of these, but not all, come from a Gallup meta-analysis, looking at all sorts of range of employee engagement surveys, and a total of 1 million people, 1 million employees, were data points in this study. So it's like a really big study. I know some of you work for enormous organizations like Royal Mail, but not even you have got 1 million people. So this is like a really big study, and a lot of folk in there. And we're seeing things like, obviously, employee turnover is down significantly, but 60% fewer quality defects. I mean, that's a big result. The higher customer advocacy off the back of that, and we're going to be hearing from Dulcie at Mitchells and Butlers, a great pub chain, restaurant chain later, about the link between employee engagement and profitability and good food and all sorts of other magnificent things and greater productivity. So we can keep saying we don't think it makes a difference, but actually the data is completely compelling the other way. And I think it's going to be a bit like the customer debate, that if you focus on employees, your business will perform better, and that we should all be confident to go out and do that research in our organizations because the results will be pretty clear and pretty compelling. And that then leads to a whole new debate about what is the right level of investment to make in this area, and what is the right nature of that investment. And I know we're going to be talking a little bit later on the panel about whether if you're running a pub chain and you know that employee engagement is the best cause of good food and happy customers, then are you better taking some of that marketing budget and turning it to the employees? Those big amounts that get spent on advertising and above the line and below the line marketing, the millions of pounds, and yet often in HR we're struggling to get a few £100,000 to tackle our challenge of employee engagement. And this data starts to make the case for massively upgrading the level of commitment that's needed to deliver the business results that our lords and masters are rightly expecting and looking for. The first thing to say is that employee engagement is, though it's a big issue, though many of us are looking at it, it's getting worse. And again, some interesting research here about the decline in employee engagement. Year on year, employee engagement has gone down by 9%. But much more seriously, amongst the top performers, it's gone down by 25%. Now that is a big drop against our most talented people. And more seriously, 12% of top performing employees are seriously considering leaving their organization. That means our organization. 12%, that's a heck of a big figure amongst the group that give disproportionately high value. And this is again where it gets interesting. There's different research on whether you take the top third or the top decile. But here is research on the profitability of the top third versus the bottom third. So if we're losing that orange bar, our productivity is falling automatically. So we've got this highly talented group of people who are becoming disproportionately less engaged and who are thinking of leaving us. Now that is really, business-wise, that is really serious. And there's more research about the different levels that top performers provide versus the mean in terms of profitability, generating sales. There's a lot of data that says top performers are more valuable to us and they're getting more disengaged. So the interesting question we thought was, what are we doing so wrong? It's not that companies haven't noticed employee engagement. It's not that we haven't tried to do things to improve it. And we found that there were 5 flaws that seemed to be more prevalent than anything else in terms of what companies were doing to address employee engagement and yet failing to deliver a return. And the 5 flaws are as follows. The first one is that the survey takes over. Could you do another analysis, please, on what the Northwest region in operations feel? Is there any way you could break it down further? Should we cascade it to different groups? I see some nodding around the room here, like we sort of start to recognize this situation. But the whole thing becomes about the data, about the survey. All this is a way of measuring, a way of understanding, and a way of stimulating debate. But if the debate is simply about the numbers, it's not going to change anything at all. In fact, it's going to make it worse. So when people in the next survey say nothing changed since the last survey, that's probably what happened. So we have an analysis paralysis or an over-focus on the data. And this is where things start to go wrong and people start to become disenchanted. You asked my views, you gathered them, you did nothing as a result. But actually, potentially more dangerous than this, certainly in the medium term, is the second flaw that takes place often in this, and which is the debate becomes a parent-child debate. The organization, the leaders say, oh, I'm so sorry. We have been terrible to you. I apologize. Or perhaps more modestly, tell us what you think we should do to improve employee engagement. Tell us what you want, and we'll give it to you, which sets up an impossible dynamic. For any of you who are parents will know that if you ask your child, what do you want, and you keep giving it to them, it doesn't suddenly stop with the child going, now I'm happy, don't want anything else, fine, let's just enjoy life. Yeah, you keep asking more. And the same happens when organizations go out and say, tell us what you want. Firstly, people don't know what they want. As we know with customers, people know what their needs are, what their concerns are, but they don't necessarily know what would fix it. And secondly, it makes responsibility sit entirely with the organization, whoever the organization may be. And that means it's an impossible dynamic to resolve. So again, we think we're doing a good effort, but actually employee engagement goes down because we set up a dynamic which is unfulfillable and unsustainable. The third flaw that fits neatly into this is the few grand gestures. The kind of big noise, the great conference, the Starbucks coffee shop, the flexible benefits package, the new rota scheme, whatever it is. There are lots of big stuff we can do that makes a lot of noise, but it is just a few grand gestures. Now, the same thing happens with employees and organizations and engagement. This is something like the love in the marriage. It's not something that just happens on the anniversary. It's not something that's just about buying the big gift. It happens all the time. So yes, there are things that need to be done. We worked with an organization where you had to book your holidays 6 months in advance to get it approved. Now that was just properly annoying some people, understandably. And that could be changed and people felt less annoyed. So it removed one of the blocks. But it didn't solve the problem of engagement. It didn't mean people suddenly thought, wow, it's great to work here. So yes, there are some big gestures that may need doing, but that's not going to solve the problem. And linked to the few grand gestures is the easily distracted leaders. The survey comes out, it's terribly important, we must address this, get on with it, make it happen, I'm really behind this, and then something new emerges. An even faster quick win, an even more immediate crisis, an even more urgent issue to address. And then the leaders go away, and just like a child looking to a parent, this parent-child dynamic's often been set up in advance, go, well, hang on, you didn't really mean that. That didn't last, that didn't take the time. So again, we start to make things worse rather than better, which is why employee engagement is falling despite these big efforts. I mean, the worst of all, not the worst of all, but the fifth and the one that was most easily understood in this room is the whole thing gets delegated to HR. These results are terrible, go and fix it. Once you're on that dynamic, then you've got absolutely no chance at all. Because we as HR and OD and learning and change specialists are here to advise, to counsel, to bring new insight, to help assemble solutions to address problems. But we can't fix this ourselves. And anyone who thinks we can is, I'm afraid to say, deluded. So these are things that we recognize in businesses, many of whom we've worked with, who come to us and say, we've tried everything with employee engagement, and it's still getting worse. The problem must be with them. Is there anything you can do? Kind of thinking there is nothing that we can do because they've tried it all already. But actually what's happened is this is what has been tried. So what I thought we might interestingly to do is we start to reframe the debate about employee engagement. So what is this different about the way of looking at this problem? And for those of you who know Mind Gym, you know we wouldn't bring you here to share what you've already thought or what's the common view on this, but because we have a new perspective. And I think the interesting thing that we have found in looking at this research is the tendency is to focus on the manager as the key person who makes a difference to employee engagement. And though that a manager is important, they aren't the critical person. And there's a second thing, because we're focused on the leaders and the leadership that's provided. That's the critical thing. But that isn't the critical thing either. Important, but it's not critical. It's about the environment, who else we've got here. That's the critical thing. Important, absolutely, I grant you. But it's not the critical thing. The critical thing is the individual themselves and how they think about work, the lens through which they look at the world. And changing that, as we heard from the Department of Work and Pensions, is not the situation that matters, it's how people see it. And therefore, the heart of our approach for employee engagement needs to be about changing the mindsets of individuals. And that's predominantly what I want to talk about now. There's some fantastic research that shows that people who do the same things can think completely differently about it. That things are not as they are, the top line, things are as we see them, the bottom line. We know that optimists live longer, achieve more, are more popular, get elected faster, more likely to be leaders, and so on and so forth. We also know they're wrong more often. Bit of a dilemma there. I could be very happy, but very wrong. And we know that people work harder at things they're not paid for. In an experiment where people had to allocate Gary Larson cartoons into different piles based on themes, the group that was not paid to do it enjoyed it and spent longer doing it than the group that was paid. That was the only difference between it. We know, for example, that the employees with a sense of purpose work longer. That's no surprise there. But more interestingly, the full-time workers who are happiest with their work-life balance are the ones who work the longest hours. And that sounds bonkers. If you want to improve work-life balance, surely you change the hours or flexi time or so forth. But actually, those people are the self-employed. They work the longest hours, but they have a purpose, autonomy, and so on and so forth that makes them feel fantastic about their work-life balance. So things are not as they are as we see them. And therefore, if we want to build sustained employee engagement, it doesn't matter how many great campaigns we run or posters we provide or benefits or whatever else, unless we change the way that our people look at work. And sometimes it's about hiring people who have this mindset, and others it's about changing it within. And I want to just briefly share with you a bit more about what sits behind those mindsets that make a disproportionate impact on employee engagement. And the first is that of the flexible optimist. I don't know if any of you came to our Survivors Summit, where Richard Reed from Innocent spoke, and he talked about hiring people with yes in their heart. And it was kind of like basically saying, I want to hire optimists who feel autonomous. And if we wanted to increase employee engagement, the simplest thing we could do is just hire optimists. Because they will come to work feeling sunny and happy, and when things go wrong, they'll go, oh, well, it'll be all right, and I'll learn from it, and I'll turn downsides into upsides and so forth. So that kind of makes sense when we think about it. The question is, we've got the people we've got now, what could we do to change? Are people born optimists? Is that a fixed state of mind? Or is that something that can be adapted? One study got people, 3 groups of people. One said about the great things that had happened that day, wrote down 5 things at the end of each day, 5 great things that had happened, whether it's the sun shining or they went to the gym or whatever it was. The next group did 5 bad things that had happened that day. And the third group just wrote down 5 events that had happened that day. The first group not only were happier, but they took more exercise, they were healthier, and their life started to improve as a result. And that was simply by writing down 5 happy things, or 5 good things that had happened that day. In a much bigger study, they took a group which is a particularly different, if you think of the hardest group you've got to change, this is like harder than any of them, I reckon. And it's teenagers who suffer from depression, who have behavioral problems as a result. So that's like a really tough group of people to change. And what they did was they ran a 12-week program that, for argument's sake, I'm going to call optimism classes, but they weren't. They were like, how do you reframe situations, writing down 5 positive things, doing random acts of kindness, and a whole range of activities, mental activities like that. And that lasted for 12 weeks. And it's no surprise that at the end of that 12-week course, if you like, that those who'd been on it felt less depressed and that behavioral disorders went down versus those that hadn't. What's interesting is what happened after that. So they carried on going back and measuring for 30 months. And here's the graph. The red line represents the level of stress, the red bars, of those who did not go, and the blue is the levels of those that did go. And this is a pretty amazing, proper science, serious result. Those who didn't go, the control and interventions, you can see pretty similar. The post, there's a bit of a difference, but not a lot. 6 months, you think, oh my gosh, maybe the difference isn't going to work. But actually, the long-term pattern is incredibly powerful. So if we can turn people from being pessimists into optimists, that starts to have a 30-month, in this study, impact, not a 30-day impact. And therefore, the heart of sustainability is going to be helping people to start to see things differently. The next area where there's very significant research on impact is the sense of purpose, a sense of feeling that what I'm doing matters to me, to my organization, and to society at large. Again, the interesting thing here is back to, does it matter what job I'm doing in order to make a difference on this? And the study they conducted here was they asked people, to what extent do you think of what you do as a job, earn some money, buy the new greenhouse, whatever it happens to be, to what extent do you see it as a career, the next step on the ladder to go and progress and become the senior, whatever it is? And to what extent do you see it as a calling, making a big impact in people's lives or doing something that is more significant than what I can do? And the fascinating thing about this research was it made no difference what job someone did as to what they replied. Whether you were a hospital janitor or a doctor, whether you were a social worker or a banker, whether you were a lawyer or an accountant, whether you worked in America or India or the United Kingdom, the results were pretty much the same every way through. And the results were a third, a third, a third. So what that tells us is it's only so much we can do to recreate jobs and say, well, you know, I work for the World Wildlife Fund who's here. That's a fantastic organization with a great purpose. They can clearly get people to feel purpose. But someone else here is working for PricewaterhouseCoopers. Maybe that's harder to think of a purpose behind that. It's my organization that's the problem. A few giggles from a few people who may possibly be from PricewaterhouseCoopers or their competitors, all of whom are wonderful. And I think the issue here is that it's not the situation. It's not the environment. It's not the organization. It's not the industry you're in. It's about how we choose to look at it. And what's even more interesting about this is the difference in terms of need for more work-life balance, need for more my level of life satisfaction, and my level of job satisfaction. And between thinking of it as a job and as a career, there is no significant difference. The people who see it as just getting the money and the people who see it as next rung up the ladder have the same level of life satisfaction, the same level of job satisfaction, and in statistically significant terms, the same level of need for improved work-life balance. But once you get to see it as a calling or a purpose, that changes. And here's the data. As you can see, in terms of work-life balance, the need goes down significantly. In terms of job and life satisfaction, it goes up significantly. So again, if we can change the way, the lens through which people are looking at their work, that gives them a big boost. Their life's getting better, job's getting better. It also gives us a big boost because we start to deliver sustainable employee engagement. Well, just a brief thought about graduates. The research at the moment shows that today's graduates will do between 12 and 15 jobs by the time they're 38. 12 to 15 jobs. I mean, that's just, I can't even count that far. It's just an enormous amount of jobs. And it means they're going to start looking for a new job before they got good at the current one. Every year they're going to start looking for something else, and it takes 9 months to a year to just get competent. So what is it that's going to change this sense of the peripatetic graduate who keeps moving on, which is not only probably not great for their life satisfaction, but it's terrible for our businesses because the cost of recruiting and replacing, as we know, is vast. And the answer, we started a research on this, and we'll be publishing more, and we're really interested in any research you've got on what keeps graduates to stay. But the last point is showing that what they're doing matters to their career, to their business, and to the world at large. So that's a big part of creating this sense of purpose. The next thing is, the next mindset that's so important, is the sense of feeling in control. This is a picture of King Canute, one of the most misunderstood people in history, because everyone thinks he thought he could stop the tide because he was the king. Actually, what happened is he felt powerless because all his courtiers told him he was so powerful he could stop the tide because he was king. And so he actually went out to prove them wrong. But it's that sense of what can we affect and what can't we affect. And those people, like the people who are self-employed, who feel they can affect their outcome and their work-life balance and their times and their ranges of their work life, will feel more engaged. Now, again, this is often a mindset. Yes, there are things we can remove. But when we look at empowerment and how that works, it's often about the relationship with the manager, certainly, but also about how individuals feel about when they can take a risk, when they can try something out, and what the consequences they feel will be if it doesn't work or it doesn't happen. So it's not just saying this is what it is how they feel about it. The fourth mindset that's absolutely critical is that we feel competent. And this is a study from the Center for Applied Positive Psychology, who we use in our Give Me Strengths workout, which is a strengths finder. What am I really good at that I know, my realized strengths? What am I really good at that I actually hadn't realized that I'm quite good at that, but that's actually one of my things that I'm strong at. What are the things that I've learned to be good at, but actually I really don't enjoy? A friend of mine says his son really doesn't like rugby, but he's really good at rugby. And that's the kind of the learned behavior. I've learned to do this. My dad used to play rugby. My brother plays rugby. I've become good at it. But we have these learned behaviors in our organizations or our roles, things we think we should be good at. And sometimes we think we're not very good at stock control or we're not very good at budgeting, but we think we have to get good at that. And we're seen as good at it, but we're not. I mean, the things we're actually weak at. And the vital thing for engaged employees is that we feel that we're competent and we're good at what we're doing, which is partly about building skills and all the good work that many people do here on skills development. But it's also about shaping my job and my work so that I can do things that I'm really strong at. So competence is the fourth of the 5 mindsets. And the 5th one is resilience. There's so much to say about this, but I'm not even going to begin to try and cover the full area of resilience, except that we know that a lot of it is about how we choose to frame and look at problems. And therefore, if we can help people frame and look at difficulties, such as the Department of Work and Pensions, and the challenges we're going through. We did a big project with Currys, where 40% of the jobs were removed over 2 years in the logistics division, almost all of whom were not graduates, but school leavers who joined for life. And we managed through a series of interventions by helping them become more resilient and focus on what they could affect. We reduced employee attrition. We also got customer service the best it had been for 21 years, despite the fact they were taking out all these roles. And there's a great myth that just because jobs are being lost, everyone has to be disengaged, and the customer service will get worse and costs will go where they do. Actually, then we can change mindsets so people feel much more capable and much more energized by it. This is a chance for me to go out and be a cook, one of them said. I've always wanted to be a chef. This is my chance to get the training. I've got 2 years to practice my skills, learn about the market before I go off and do it, and find a local premises and use my redundancy payments to put the deposit down on the sandwich shop, restaurant-y type thing, and move ahead with that. So this is a fantastic way of helping people build resilience, because the shocks will come, the change will not stop. Things will probably get harder and tougher and so forth. So building that resilience is vital. Next up is the role of the manager. So yes, the individual is at the heart of this, and if we don't get that bit right, and we don't focus on changing employee mindsets, everything else is going to have a very short half-life. It is going to be like the smoke, the big conference and the dry ice and the lovely campaign. And the key managers, we've done a whole report on dynamic performance management, and we looked at what are the 5 factors that make for great performance managers. These are the things that managers can get right, that if they focus on these, employees feel that their work is valued, that they are learning and growing, and are more likely to take part and be involved and engaged in the work that they do. So there's some stuff about managers here. But there's also some really interesting stuff about trust. And this is the difference between sensible trust and sensitive trust. And if you think about people you know who keep their promises, do what they say, deliver on timelines, all of that fits as the sensible trust. But who would you send in to see your boss or a really tricky client, knowing they will handle the situation well? We were talking to a client the other day who's sending all the top high flyers off to another country where their headquarters is. I won't say the name of the country, otherwise it might give away who the organization is. And they're terribly worried, because last time they sent all the top performers along, someone stripped off and jumped in the pond in the atrium of the main hotel, and it was still daylight. And therefore they're worried about how they'll choose to behave. Will they behave properly or appropriately when they go off and meet all the senior bosses in this new country? So there's a lack of sensitive trust. That's quite an extreme example. But there's that sense of how should we behave in awkward situations? How do we match credibility? How do we understand the politics? How do we listen behind words? And it's that level of trust that the manager needs to be able to provide if they're going to be able to manage the employee relationship such that it grows. What's the appropriate boundary? What happens when someone tells you, as your manager, something that's perhaps a bit intimate in their lives? Do I look sexy in this? Do you think I should be a model? Someone said the other day at an organization. How do you respond to that? What's the appropriate thing to do? And there are a whole range of questions and situations. Have you ever seen Friends? Do you remember Joey from Friends when he gets promoted and he still wants to be a mate of everybody else? And of course, they're all chatting about him behind the water cooler. It's understanding how those boundaries are and how we can move from that. I want to talk a little bit also about leaders. And this is the role of leaders to give belief, to give that sense of where are we going, Why is it the right place to go? And why am I the right person as your leader to help you get there? And we've done a lot of work on what it is that creates belief in the future and what leaders can do. And what's most interesting about this, we've discovered, is the people who are seen to be the best communicators often aren't amongst the leadership team. And here's an example from an insurance company where we sent people out in pairs, leaders in pairs from the executive team, to go and communicate the new strategy at an event like this with breakouts and so on and so forth. We then measured a whole range of factors, including, I believe what I've heard, I trust what I heard. And the second highest scorer was the person who was seen as the worst communicator, because they took their glasses off and they lost their page in their notes and they bumbled a bit, and they weren't seen as smooth. There was the guy who threw out the Mars bars, who had the jokes, who slapped people on the back, who was a great performer. Lots of laughter, lots of amusement, people thought it was great fun, but they didn't trust him. They didn't believe what he had to say. And therefore, there's something about thinking differently about who are the best communicators and what is the best way of communicating such that we generate belief. And belief is the key word for leaders to focus on, to concentrate on, in order to create that sense of the super nature of engagement. The final piece in the puzzle, if you like, is around colleagues. So what can we do to generate an environment where working with people we like? And again, that's a really big factor. And a lot of that is about being willing to take part. We held some roundtables. Some of you were at them to discuss this report before we published it. And one of the things that we discovered was that people had made efforts to go to things they didn't want to go to, like a bowling evening, because they felt it was the right thing to do to build a sense of team. And it's the difference between those people, all of us, who are willing to make that extra effort, who are willing to go bowling or karaoke. I hate karaoke, I've got the worst voice in the world. In the car rota, they used to make me sing happy birthdays so they could laugh at how bad my voice was. But nonetheless, it's that effort to go and see things, to take part in things that otherwise wouldn't have been the case. So there are 4 elements. There's the individual, there's the leader, there's the manager, and there's the colleague. But the heart of it is without a doubt the individual. And therefore, the thoughts, there's lots we can do if employee engagement surveys are down, scores are down. We can do appreciative inquiry research to find out what's good and how to get more of it, and that will undoubtedly make a difference. We can communicate the new strategy in a way that's compelling and engaging and involves lots of people, and that will undoubtedly make a difference. We can help managers manage performance in a way that stretches and helps people grow and learn goals, and that will undoubtedly make a difference. But it is like trying to solve global warming with relying on recycling and insulation and wind power, all good things, but they aren't going to solve the problem in a sustainable way by themselves. That the only way of solving this problem sustainably, we believe, is by changing the way employees look and think about life in general and about work specifically. So what practically might we actually do to address that? And again, we've got an idea here to put to you. And it's an idea born out of the size of problem that we think this is and the opportunity there is to get things right. And it's about helping people develop their own personal ways of looking. Personal development for the 21st century. The personal development for the 20th century was time management, stress, presentation skills, all sorts of things that we all know about and kind of old hat. The personal development for the future is about how I can look at things differently. And what if we had a month on energy, which would be a way of describing optimism, if you like? How do we manage for energy? How do we create our own energy? How can I have more energy? You know, we've all seen the Barocca advertisements when they're running on the treadmills and Barocca just makes your day. How can I do that for myself? How can I get my own mental Barocca working? And what this is about is energy, inspiration, opportunity, achievement, having a way of helping me think differently so I can get more of these things, more energy, more achievement, and so forth. And the way to do that is to help people, and those who know Mind Gym will know about the workouts that we run, to work out on Create Your Own Luck, which I know some of you are going to later. So what are the things I can do to help reframe the problem that I have and look at the situation differently? And helping managers manage for that. So how can I manage for optimism? What are the things that I can do to help people think more optimistically? And this is the heart of a sustained approach to employee engagement.